right? Hmm. So how can you prevent this reinforcement? You can, as I was saying, you can use those backing bar or strip, right? You can use those back weld or back weld techniques to to prevent those insufficient reinforcements. There are so many welding defects actually. In between those, I personally feel that the cracking is the cracking is the most happening one. So it always happen that whenever you do some melting and solidification, cracks always will generate because of those solidification shrinkage, right? Because of those contraction strain, because of those thermal expansion coefficient of that material, right? So, yeah, there is something called insufficient penetration or incomplete penetration. So, it will look something like this. So, let's say this is your world metal, and my insufficient penetration is something like this. So, this is the region where the penetration is not proper, and it can be because of some low welding current or some insufficient root opening of the weld metal or some shorter arc length, or if you are joining welding at a too high speed that weld deposition didn't get enough time to penetrate. So those reasons are there. You have to carefully choose the welding parameters in a way that uh, it will not generate any spatter. It will not generate a huge volume of weld metal. At the same time, there should not be any undercut. There should not be any lack of penetration, or there should not be any insufficient penetration and those aspects. You know? So, yeah, there can be inclusions like there can be slag inclusion where slag can be entrapped within weld mainly due to low welding current. There can be something called arc strike. So, arc strike is generally coalescence of you can think it of as some kind of localized coalitions of arc outside the weld region, right? So it may contain cracks and it can be avoided. So yeah, so there is something called arc strike, and arc craters also can generate. So arc crater is mainly you can think it of a kind of void or cavity or depression. This we had already covered in our earlier video, right? Weld crater formation that will act that will appear as a uh, depression or as a cavity which will left at the termination of weld where you are finishing your weld region, and there your weld pool will get left unfilled, right? So that is also due to improper weld termination technique. And then in terms of cracks, which I was talking about, there are a lot of cracks that may generate. There can be in terms of wherever it is generating, right? It can be longitudinal, it can be transverse, it can be crater crack, throat crack, um, it can be hot crack, it can be cold crack. So depending on where your cracks are getting generated, at what location, at what position, at what direction, you can name those cracks, right? Like like for transverse crack, your crack will be running into or inside your weld, which will be transverse to the weld line direction. At the same time, what is longitudinal crack? My crack will be running in the direction of weld axis, right? So let's say my let's say my welding is something like this. So where my cracks will happen, this is my longitudinal crack, right? This will be my transverse crack. So depending on at what directions my cracks is getting generated, you can name those cracks. Longitudinal crack mainly generate due to some fast cooling of weld joint, right? There can be lot of shrinkage stress or residual stress in high constraint areas. Those can generate, right? So to prevent that, you need to weld towards the areas where there will be less constraints, right? So those aspects you need to keep it in mind. Um, yeah, there can be crater crack. So crater crack generally form in the shape of some kind of X. So it will form some kind of X shape, and it is found in a crater. So they are generally hot cracks. So the center of the whirlpool that becomes solid before the outside of the whirlpool, if it happens, the cooling of the center that apart during the cooling, right? So there will be those tensile residual stresses. So wherever if my center of the pool becomes cooler compared to the surrounding one, uh, there will be those stretching from the surrounding one, and it will apart those whirlpool and it will form the crack, right? Um, those are very fundamental crack formation in any kind of not any kind of in any in fusion welding technique, right? Then depending on uh, the location, so it can generate in your throat area of your fillet fillet joint, right? So if my longitudinal crack is getting generated in my throat area, it will call throat crack. So those aspects are there. Then there can be toe crack also. Now toe crack is basically due to the transverse shrinkage stresses, right? So this is mainly for heat affected zone and brittleness problems. This toe crack gets generated, and you have to use this preheating technique if possible to use this more ductile to make it more ductile or yeah. So there is something called root crack. Root crack is also similar as a throat crack. So you have to keep these things in mind. So there are a lot of cracks which we have gone through this video lectures. So let us finish this off. In my ninth question, I asked what is the type of welding defect that is caused due to stresses on heating and cooling? Is it incomplete fusion? No. Shrinkage void is the one which is due to the heating and cooling aspects, right? So the shrinkage stress or contraction stress is